Welcome to the moment that changed everything, where we interview notable creative people to gain insights into how they got started and learn more about the moments that shaped them and their careers. Today we sit down with Trevor Schoenfeld.
And the best talent I've ever run across, either writers or art directors or even account people, are curious about everything, about interactions. They're always paying attention to the little things. I was always amazed because these are the ones that are going to go far, because what they're doing is curating their world. They're looking at things and filling their mind with creative ideas that they may or may not use, but down the road they'll have these things ready to go.
Trevor is a sought-after creative consultant at the company he created, Brooklyn 7. Before that, he was the chief creative officer at Sandbox Advertising, CD at Ariad, and senior VP at Young Rubicam. Today, we hear about how he spent his childhood dreaming of being an ad writer, developing a strong sense of strategy to sell work, and traveling to the US to reorganize a multinational agency. The guy has chops. Trevor Schoenfeld, thanks so much for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
We're going to cover, I thought a lot about this because you're unique in that you're one of the people that's out there that freelances on a high level. And so I want to get into kind of three big topics today. One of them is going to be strategy, and maybe we can talk a little bit about the difference between strategy and a creative idea, because I think a lot of listeners would get a benefit from that. The other thing is, you start life as a writer, and then you slowly evolve into this level of creative director, and that involves a whole different muscle. Critiquing creative work is different than creating creative work. There's the whole, human, personal level that is involved in hurting people's feelings,
yes.
Or trying not to do that and be constructive criticism. And then maybe we could end with a story or two, or maybe what you're up to now.
Sure.
So I think what I'll start with is, how did you get into the business? What was the moment that happened that kind of made you think that you'd make a career in advertising?
Career in it, it was funny. When I was little, I would watch TV with a notepad and write ads when I was little. My cousins have a couple of notepads when they babysat me, and they were horrible. I mean, I can't imagine what they were. Just whatever a kid comes up with cartoon-like. But I always liked that part of it. And funny ads, I always gravitated towards. The rest of them, for couches or aluminum siding or whatever it was, where they had a jingle or something, I just got turned off by. And then in university, I took politics, which got me nowhere, an arts degree that they weren't hiring a lot of political scientists when I graduated. So I was a bartender and I was freelancing. I knew enough to put together a book, and there was an art director I bartended with, and we got small clients basically out of the phone book and knocked on doors and got rejected a lot, but got little things. They weren't great things. And then a Sunday, a creative director came in hungover and sat at my bar and asked, he looked pretty haggard. He was out drinking the night before. And I nursed him back to health, and he gave me his business card. And I go, oh, really? Oh, he was at BBDO. This is in Calgary. And I'm like, I'm a copywriter. I'm looking to get some work. Oh, why don't you come see me tomorrow, being Monday? So I went in Monday, and he never saw me. I sat in the lobby. I worked evenings, so I could sit in the lobby. Tuesday, I went and saw him. Wednesday, I went and saw him. Thursday, I went and saw him. By Thursday, the receptionist is kind of feeling bad. Friday, I went, I don't have to work during the day, so this is a lead. I'm not giving up. Friday, he sends out probably a junior art director, now that I think about it. She took my book, went back. She came back and said, okay, he's going to see you. And I went back and saw him. Turns out he's a really nice guy. He was just trying to blow me off because I was a bartender and not really anybody he wanted to see. He saw my book and said, there's some stuff in here I'm interested in. Have you ever worked on a transit campaign? We're doing something for, at the time it was Talking Yellow Pages. Did you ever know what those were? I'm dating myself.
Yeah, you're going to have to educate me on what a Talking Yellow Page is.
The Yellow Pages had codes. You could call in and get the weather, get the hockey scores, get your horoscope. You would dial a 4-digit code.
So these were like voicemail messages?
Yeah, all pre-recorded messages that had ads before them you had to listen to. And Talking Yellow Pages.
Wow.
So it was a transit campaign. He goes, have you ever written one? And I lied and said, sure, yeah, no problem. Gave me the brief, and I came back on Monday. I spent the weekend, every waking hour, writing ads, and I came in with a yellow notepad, and I think I had like 75 headlines for this stuff. He's like, what? 75 headlines. So he and his partner took them, looked at them, sat me down with about 10 he liked, and put me with an art director and said, she's going to build these up and do more like this. So I sat around for a week and did more. They went to the client. I think they sold 8 of them and 6 were mine. They ran a month later. I see all my work on the street. I'm beside myself because I'd never seen something I've written before. And turns out the ad award show was a month later. They entered them and they won for best transit. And I'm thinking, this is the easiest job in the world.
Came out of the blocks, guns blazing.
Wow, where do I sign up? So I did more freelance with them and moved my way around after that.
Wow, so you didn't go to school for advertising, and did you put your portfolio together like just on your own?
Yeah, on my own. Wow. I wrote out ads. I drew them out. I can draw. And after I looked at my first book and I saw what books actually looked like, I went to a desk and saw actually portfolios on a desk. I sat down with an art director and had a lot of the ads I wrote out and just loosely drew and made them into better mock-ups because I didn't know what they looked like. I had no clue about the business at all. I just knew some insights around what I like, and that was kind of my temperature gauge, and a lot of it was puns that I had to be beaten out of me at the beginning.
I still love a good pun.
To be honest. The dearth of that. And then learn my way as I went. I had great teachers at the beginning, and lucky enough to be around a couple of English writers that were trained in England and had a great gift of copy and syntax, and they knew how to write to size, like the size of the ad. When you used to have to sit down long before the computers came out, you had to have a good size before you mock these things up, and typesetters. So I learned the craft of that the hard way, and on terrible accounts, like not terrible accounts, but not very sexy accounts. I was not working on liquor and shoes and cars. In the Calgary market, it's oil and gas, heavy equipment, B2B, lots of B2B.
Yeah, and I was going to say, I mean, how many agencies would have been in Calgary at that point? I guess a small handful, if that.
There were 3 or 4 at the time, and then a huge slew of mid-level ones that had 2 or 3 clients that could keep the bills on. They only had 3 people and a coffee machine. The largest at the time then that I worked my way up to was Ogilvy. That's where I met my partner in Calgary, and he came back here, and he got a job here and called me up and said, hey, you got to get back to Toronto. I'm back to Toronto. I'm from Calgary. So I joined him here and took off from that.
Wow. So who was, when you got to Toronto, who are you working with, and who then, at that point how long were you in Calgary working in advertising?
3 years maybe?
So 3 years, still not a lot of time, still a lot to learn.
A ton.
So you came here and worked, and then who did you work under? Like who helped you hone your skills?
I got to work at G. Jeffrey at a time when they had a huge pool of talent. I think back to that, and the people that came out of that era started agencies. Like these guys are, and women are giants in the business from there, not only on the creative side, but even account sides. It was a finishing school for advertising. And it was a shop which I haven't seen repeated a lot, where it was co-opetition and not people looking to steal your work or cut it down. You wanted to be the guy coming in with the work that everybody admired. That was the goal there. And everybody there was talented and on their game and hustling. That was another thing they taught you, because they weren't a multinational, so there wasn't a huge pool of people to help do other things. You did it yourself. If you had to do a spec spot, you had to figure out how to do that. You're left to your own devices, so you were quiet. At least I was at the beginning, just soaking everything up and watching how the really talented people did things and how hard they worked and how hard a senior writer would go over the line over and over and over again before he liked the one and that was one at a time, not even 50. He would craft one and then move on, and that's the one he tried to beat. So it was a finishing school to see how it really was done, how the machine really worked. And then the flip side as well, there were 2 creative directors at the time. One was Robin Heisey and Brett Channer. 2 completely different personalities, but each had their skills. So if you gave Robin something, he could sell the crap out of it. He's a magician. The boardroom, and I think they were both account guys at one time.
Yeah.
So they could sell like no one's business.
Having Robin in a room, because we worked together a little bit here, and yeah, having him in a room, and I think his pedigree too was of a time, and but having Robin in a room and being able to just he's spellbinding in a way, right? You can't take your eyes off of him, and there's no air in the room, and you're along for the ride, and you really enjoy the ride. He's excellent in a room. But you're right, Brett Chandler is a totally different guy, totally different approach.
Yeah. Robin's the velvet glove, and Brett Chandler's the steel helmet, the steel gauntlet in it.
Yeah, if Brett is listening to this, much respect to him, and he's been wildly successful too, and two different styles.
Oh yeah, he's very smart and very straightforward with something. So with him, he drags things in his toe because he's just so focused on something. When he locks on it, his instincts are usually 100% spot on. It's getting people on board to do that, whereas Robin's very good at warming up a room. And that's, some of the questions you ask, what are the life lessons you get? It took me a while to figure out because I thought I knew all the answers. And then when you get into a room with really smart people, you learn quickly you don't. And that's humbling. But if you can put that aside and start listening more, which is a key to this business, you'll learn everything.
Yeah.
And so every creative director has a strength you should watch for. They're not all the best creative people. Some are really good with talent. Some are really good at selling. Some are great with the strategy. Right. Some are really good with the craft. Like they'll take it over the finish line. So if you can figure out what that is, use it.
Yeah, and we talked a little bit off camera about this idea that just because someone is very good at a singular aspect of creative, excellent writer or excellent strategy person, there are some individuals who are the complete package and who have a lot of strengths in all those areas, but it doesn't necessarily translate to teaching. And I think we can talk a little bit about this now, about this move from being a creator of creative, and then the muscles that have to be exercised and become proficient at critiquing work in a constructive way, guiding younger teams without crushing them. Which I think everybody's had anyone with any experience has been in a room with a creative director who has an excellent portfolio, but the teaching aspect of it just doesn't translate. So how did you make that move from writer to creative director? And maybe you could share some mistakes that you made, because I'm sure there must have been some.
I made them all. Yeah. Hopefully I learned from them.
Yeah.
There isn't a school for creative directors. I mean, you have to learn, and maybe by that point when you're elevated to a role where you have to teach and guide other people, maybe you have more time as an associate to have a team under you, if you can do that. I don't know if now, I'm not sure if that's with the pace we go, that's even a thing. Being in creative departments where you're called in for a pitch, I see a lot of new young talent, which is great. But that mid-level is almost disappearing, and then you have the senior people who are beaten to death in meetings. So that layer of teaching and coaching and learning and having a net, because you don't get it right all the time. You do hurt someone's feelings, or you don't figure out that this person is motivated by something other than what you're motivated by, which a lot of the really talented creative directors, some of them, they just can't translate it because they'll say, this is horrible. Why did you even show me this? And people are, crestfallen.
Right.
Instead of saying, explain to me why you came up with this. Like, what's the idea? To talk about the idea of things, not just the work. If you don't like something, you're not going to help somebody if you don't get to the real challenge, which is they're not getting the brief. Or for that matter, if you see something and all the ideas are way off base, you'll ask to see the brief and go, okay, we have a bigger problem. And it's not the creative team, it's the brief that's the problem.
Sure.
So back to your question, I wish there was a finishing school for creative directors. I mean, they can share war stories, and a lot of them do, after hours or when you get to see more senior people around the business. But for that matter, some people shouldn't be presenting either.
Yeah.
You can go through training and they bring people in, but they're great at the work, but give it to somebody else to finish.
Yeah, I think when it comes to younger people dealing with creative directors who may or may not have strengths as it relates to the specifics, it's always a great exercise for you to start with the strategy, because defending your work with the creative director is almost the same as defending your work to a client. So if you don't have a strong grasp of what the strategy is, the creative idea that you're trying to sell might suffer in the end, because it can't be subjective. And if you're going to win an argument with your creative director, you're going to likely win it on strategy. Even if he sends you back and says, look, the way you've executed this insight isn't quite what I think would be the strongest, at least you've won there. At least you're not starting from zero, which I think that's a whole other thing. And we just had Janet Peck on the podcast, and she had talked about how, don't fall in love with your work, because it's going to be one after the other, and you're going to have to go back to the well, and you're going to have to go back to the well with at least some sense of enthusiasm. And if you do fall in love with your work, well, that becomes increasingly difficult to do that, because you only think that there's one answer when we all know there's tons. So that's pretty interesting. So how did you learn more about strategy? Who was the person in your career who helped you or mentored you through really understanding the difference between strategy and creative ideas?
I worked in New York for 2 years. I went from Toronto to New York, and there was a strategist at the shop I went to. The company I went to work at was a conflict shop for Ogilvy. Whatever Ogilvy couldn't take, this shop could. It was a Chinese wall. And they had a great creative director who did all the IBM Blue Bar work. So he knew.
Amazing.
Yeah, his pedigree was fantastic. He was actually Dick Coveney's roommate in university.
Wow.
He had great stories. And the strategist at this shop was ex-Chiat. I think he was the second or third properly trained strategist in North America when the Brits brought that back, and Chiat had one of the first ones. He was trained under, I think it was a woman who was one of the key people at West. He learned under her, and his methodology for finding things was not going to the internet and looking up facts. He had intuition about certain trends in the market. So for one example, he would look at, we had Corning as a client, and he wanted to dig into what people actually thought about Corning, because everybody thinks pink fiberglass, Pyrex plates, and at the time there was this thing called fiber optics, and it was for telephones. Nobody had any idea what that was going to be for. Tech heads knew, because it was going to be the internet. So he went out and started asking people who would buy this, who would use it, how is it going to be put in the ground, all these different questions, and then came back and formulated ideas around the product and how it's going to be used, and then looked at what people thought about Corning now and what he wants people to think about later. And that gully is where he started digging and came up with insights for it, and then went back to the client with 2 or 3 with some creative work behind it. And we hit on one, and they were really in the future business. They're not in the business of making glass. They're in the business of connecting people to the future, because that's what the fiber did. So there was a campaign to go to Wall Street. There was a campaign for the employees, so they understood what they were about, very much the golden circle. And then there was a consumer part of it. And all of those 3 things pulled together, and he kept doing that over and over and over again. It was fascinating to watch that. So I soaked all of that. I've stolen everything from him.
Right, and I imagine you still employ that to this
Everything,
day.
yeah, to that foundation. And it's also interesting to go in a room and see somebody put out an insight, what they call an insight, and it's not. You were talking earlier, it's a fact. It's a product fact.
Yeah.
Oh, we have 3 widgets, not 2.
Yeah.
That's a product detail. That's not an insight. And that's something you talk about down the road. That's not what starts.
Yeah. Yeah, we talked about that, how, I think if there's, the creative teams are out there and they're listening to this, when it comes to getting a brief, you should probably just steel yourself that you're probably not going to get a lot of great briefs. And that sometimes getting the brief is where, that's really kind of where it starts, because you have to really start to pepper that brief with your own questions and ask yourself if it has this ring of truth. If it does, then great. Then you might start the conceptual process at that point. But a lot of times you can look at a brief, and where the strategy comes in really is an echoing of a product attribute or a product benefit, which we both know isn't a strategy.
No, that's brand preference, and that's completely different. That's a coupon.
Yeah, I know. I remember when I worked at Gray in New York, and there'd be a project that was coming down the the pike, and the strategist might take 2 weeks. And it's, it's a terrible thing to accuse someone of. But after 2 weeks, to come back with a document that says egg beaters is easy, was kind of disappointing, right? And, sometimes that strategy part would squeeze a lot of the timeline. And now you've got 2 weeks to now come up with an idea that overcomes this really thin layer of, let's call it what it is, a product benefit, not a strategy. Now you gotta work to get back to what the strategy really should be, and then move forward with creative ideas. So, I think one of the stories that I talk about, maybe to young creatives, in identifying the differences even single words can make in a brief, is, do you remember the campaign by Lee Jeans, and it was called Buddy Lee?
Oh yeah.
Right. So Buddy Lee was this little miniature doll who would get himself in all sorts of crazy situations, and hearing the creative director talk about what the difference was in the brief, and he said the brief could have said that Lee jeans are durable. Okay.
Sure.
Which was, a product attribute, really, that they're durable jeans. But it didn't say that. What it said was Lee jeans are indestructible. And in that one word, it pushed the creative people into a place that was like, well, we can't just show guys riding cowboys and and roping steers. We got to go beyond that. And they put this poor doll into hyperbole and blew up cars. And
well, he turned it into a dare. That one word, if you think about the person at the backside of that, the creatives, but even the consumer, durable, oh, that's nice, That's a good thing to have. Work gloves, anything in Home Depot is durable. Right. That's what you think, orange shelves and sawdust. When you say indestructible, I think Evel Knievel.
Yeah, that's right.
It takes it to a whole new level. But for somebody writing a brief should inspire you. It shouldn't be the answer. Mm-hmm. It should inspire your thinking to connect things in ways for the product, either around the truth or any of the tensions that you want to play with. What's the real reason? Yeah. Do I want this? Do I fear this? Do I covet it? Do I feel better about myself when I have it? Is it something I'm shy about having? But it's the humble brag. Right. What is it about it? The real truth. And a lot of times you show those back to the client. And I'm not chastising a client, but there's tension. And when there's tension, it makes people nervous. Yeah. But that's where the truth lies. Because if it's not, then you're going to ignore it. And why would you waste your money?
I mean, I have to bring up, because, you talked about earlier, and I have to bring it up because people got to hear this. And I'll try to frame it in such a way that it makes sense and it's relevant to what we're talking about. But now you find yourself consulting and working with a lot of clients directly. And you mentioned you're working with a client who digs trenches. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm not sure if I can think of a thing that is less sexy than somebody whose entire business is digging trenches, but that's what it is. And I think a lot of people forget that behind the person who has created a company about digging trenches is an entrepreneur, and who has actually identified something that the world needs and then gone out and created it, which basically is a miracle. That it's come out of their head, and now that he's created a company that's about digging ditches. But maybe you could talk a little bit about what it's like to then create or show those clients, because I find a lot of entrepreneurs, they're not great at articulating even what they have. They have an instinct for something, and it's usually about solving a problem. But then the work that you're doing is to then drill down and kind of go, well, what is that about, and how do I articulate it to the world in such a way that it becomes motivating?
Well, it's interesting when the entrepreneurs, they see the world through what they sell. So everything to them is a chance to dig a new ditch, or to find a new client who needs those things done. A municipality who has to put in a pipe or move a highway, for example. They'll go in and have to do all the surveying, know where all the things are. They have to be very careful when they do this. They have to have safety measures. They have to test things if they're going to hit soil they've never seen before. So it's very complicated, but I'm telling you now, and your eyes are going to glaze over. So that's not sexy things. Right. In that industry it is, and anybody related to it. But then I had a chance to sit with some of the workers at lunch and just to listen what they do in a day. I was curious, what's their day like? And one of them complained that their day is usually handling complaints in a neighborhood. People come up when they see a truck. They don't care who's got the work ticket. It could be a Enbridge, for example, goes into your neighborhood to dig something. But they're the guys doing it. They're hired by Enbridge, so they're de facto Enbridge employees. And people in the neighborhood are upset. How long is my power down? How long is my water? They have questions. That's all they have. People want information. And they have to handle complaints. They have to stop. They have to make sure people are safe. It takes time, and they do this over and over and over again. So after that, I sat with the owner and said, why don't we get a list together of what you could hand people for frequently asked questions of how long it's going to be. Like, it's a basic sheet. We're going to be in your neighborhood this long. This is why. This is who's doing it. And after it, your water pressure is going to be better, or it's going to be cleaner water.
Even that.
Yeah. And then they go home and they're happy and they're not mad driving by the truck every day. And it's a good experience. And Enbridge now has, in a cocktail reception, oh, these guys from Enbridge were really polite. And they
Love
told
those
me, yeah.
guys.
And there you go. But that is a brand. Everybody goes, oh, a brand is the low. No. Brand is an interaction every day, and that one's being missed over and over again. If you find those little moments, you can turn around a perception of a brand without $1 million campaign and a spokesperson and the puck dropped in the middle of the Leafs, in Scotiabank Arena. That's not what it's about. It's the interactions.
Yeah, and I think, now more than ever, and people are kind of identifying the power of stories. And I think there's a lot of entrepreneurs and people who own businesses who are trying to get out there with their communication and trying to build brands. And they hear this term storytelling, and it's hard for them to wrap their hands around it and kind of get a handle on it. But I think that's a great example of it, in that you might need only one person who received that leaflet to kind of go, okay, well, these guys are at least being thoughtful, right?
Yeah.
And that now all those good feelings are now affixed to that brand. And all you need is that one person to then share that story with another person. And then there you have a very tangible example of how effective stories can be in painting a brand in a very positive manner. So that's amazing. So when you go out and you talk to these business owners and entrepreneurs, I'm assuming you have like a methodology and an approach that you've repeated over the years or have refined over the years. Where do you usually start? Especially with the neophyte client, who sometimes, we talked about this earlier, who sometimes has the goal in mind, what they want to have happen, but then needs some real help in terms of understanding what are the small steps that happen to get to that goal.
You mentioned that before about an approach. I was lucky enough to work at Earl's before I got into advertising. I took a pay cut when I quit bartending to get into advertising. But at Earl's, they train you how, before you even get on the floor, you have to work for at least a week and shadow somebody. Then you're the expediter, somebody standing in the kitchen looking at all the meals coming out. Then you get maybe 1 or 2 tables, and you're trained properly. And it's sales technique. It's just sales 101. Knowing the product, knowing what people want, listening to what people want, and then how to romance the sale. All of those things can be then translated into the advertising. You have the brief, you have what people want. So back to what your question was, when a client is asking for a brochure, they want something at the end. Well, let's unpack that. Why? Well, people want information. Okay, when? When do they want that information? Well, at the beginning. Probably not. You're going to buy a car. You're not looking for all the information. You're just starting to lift your head up and look at all the different cars out there. Then you're going to narrow it down. Then you're going to try and pick the ones you like, and maybe the one your wife or your partner likes. And then you might go to a lot or near a lot or watch the commercials or pick up something else, obviously the internet. Then you narrow it down. Then you want that information. You don't want that at the beginning. So when a client asks for something, why do they want it? What's the problem they think they're solving? And look at it from their consumer's eyes. Because they deal with the consumers every day over and over and over again, like those guys in the truck. But until you really realize what it is that they try to overcome, the people don't like the price of this. Well, have you trained your people to get to the point where they understand why the price is different? As opposed to the sticker shock. If I come in and I expect it to be a certain way, but this is obviously a different product and a better one, but I haven't told you why you should actually expect it to be more.
Right.
You know, it's going to be difficult to get through that, especially in in an ad. If a client wants all of the details in the ad, why? Is this the point where I need all that?
Right.
Or do I want to fall in love with a product and start imagining it in my life, and then I'll get to the price?
Right.
If the price isn't the first, if it's not the sale I'm going for on a mattress, what's the point?
Right. Right. And to that point, when it comes to explaining to a client a little bit more about who they are, what they want to achieve, what would your advice be to a small client who's looking to get out there and promote their brand, but then a lot of entrepreneurs are sort of in a position where they don't have a lot to spend? What are the small things that they can do, like the leaflet, that allows them to get out there and start building a brand slowly?
I would say look at the moments they're already interacting with people. And in those, like a post-sale, for instance, a lot of discussion. After I've bought this, or do, whatever you're selling or doing as a business, what happens after I do it? Well, what do you mean? They've bought it. Mm-hmm. Well, do you keep a list of these customers? Are you in contact with them? Do you ask them for a referral? Do you discount something for them if they get a referral? Do you send them a thank you note? What do you do? Nothing. And that is, how many people want to complain about a bank, an airline, a cell phone company, anything they've had a bad experience over and over and over again, yet a good one? That company sent me something. Right. Or they failed at something, but they made up for it. What a great story. And back to the storytelling part of it, little things. When I see portfolios and, portfolio night, or some younger creative people, maybe a son or daughter of friends that we have, are going to Humber or these great advertising schools. And we sit down for a coffee and they ask how they fix their portfolio and do different things. And I say, when you go and see a creative director or anybody you get time for, write a handwritten note and thank them. Mail it. Right. You'll be 99.9% ahead of everybody else in the business, because nobody writes letters anymore. Right. But you're going to stand out simply for the fact you thank them instead of an email or a text or a follow-up when you want a job and you keep hounding them, which you should. Send them a note and thank them. That's all you have to do for every meeting.
Yeah, it's incredible. I think advertising people are probably a lot like a lot of other people who are selling something that sometimes it's a good gut check to ask yourself whether or not you're employing the same things that you're yourself selling. We're in this business of making an impact, and yet you got to go back and kind of walk the talk. And are you doing enough in terms of managing people's expectations of yourself? I ask all the guests that come on the show, what are some key advice that you can give to young creatives who are looking to break into the business? You've clearly articulated one of those things, but what are a couple more that you would say, if you could give someone maybe 3 pieces of sound advice or a few pieces of sound advice, what would you say to them?
I was sitting on a panel a couple of years ago for an advertising conference. I can't remember what it was, next to Matt Litzinger and a few others. Mm-hmm. And as I was sitting there and the discussion was going on, I was looking up, and it was maybe it was advertising week, and there were students in the audience, and 50% of them were looking down at their phones. And at one point, it just dawns on me that so much is on a screen now. And the best talent I've ever run across, either writers or art directors or even account people, are curious about everything, mm-hmm. about interactions. They're always paying attention to the little things. They're out walking the streets. If somebody went on vacation, in the creative department, and a young person came back with a bag full of all the material they saw in the stores they went in, they went to London and look at the way this store marketed, and they brought back napkins and cups on a trip, and they're on vacation, they should be relaxing, but they brought back these things because they were interested in how they were done. I was always amazed, because these are the ones that are going to go far, because what they're doing is curating their world. They're looking at things and filling their mind with creative ideas that they may or may not use, but down the road they'll have these things ready to go. Whereas a lot of other people are on their phone, they're checking things, they're distracted. Mm-hmm. Start paying attention to the art, to the cars, to people's conversations. Listen in, eavesdrop in a restaurant. Go sit in a restaurant and people watch for an hour. Stand outside on Bloor Street and watch shoppers and what they do. You know, Paco Underhill, the writer who does he's a social scientist who watches how people shop. He'll spend hours watching the front door of a store to see what people do immediately upon entering. Mm-hmm. And he'll tell them, okay, the first step they come in here, you have to put something else, or they're distracted, or they're taking off their coat, and the first 2 racks they're missing because they're not even comfortable yet. So he's paying attention to the little things. So if you're a student now, put away the computer. If somebody gives you a brief, don't do that right away. Go out to the store. Let's say you're going to I'll pick Home Depot again, and you have a campaign for them. Go to Home Depot, talk to the manager, maybe get some help, or if your account person can, and be there. Shadow somebody for half a day and watch what happens. Mm-hmm. You'll get a rhythm of what goes on there and see what people actually do when they're there, how they get lost, what they don't know, what they do know, what they're afraid to ask. These things. That's where the truth lies in a brief.
Yeah, I mean, I've had a lot of guests come on and could be guilty of asking people of a certain era, because I'm asking people in my network to come on and talk about creativity. I mean, the upside is that most of them have a bunch of experience, and one of the things that, of course, we've seen a lot of is with technology, this urge to execute is then expedited because you can create a spec ad that looks fully realized, mm-hmm. like it even ran in the media. Whereas I think, in our era, to your point, when you started out, you were scribbling things down on yellow foolscap or whatever it was. And then, you had someone on the other side of the table who could look at the discipline of it and kind of go, I can see into the future of what this could be. Well, with technology now, people can execute self-publishing alone. Look what we're doing right now, mm-hmm. right? We're putting something out in the world that, maybe we have no business doing, but when it comes to portfolios and stuff, we've seen so much in terms of technology. So it's funny to kind of look at a young person's portfolio and look at what seems to be fully realized ideas. And this is where I think this idea of resisting the urge to execute really comes into play. Is that, are you able to see beyond the prettiness of everything and see if there's a real insight that's being, expressed in the advertising?
One of the biggest changes that you mentioned with technology, and it's great that it's there, and it's great that we have these channels. You can have podcasts, which I soak up every time I drive now. Mm-hmm. I listen to podcasts. I can learn so much sitting in traffic in this city. Right. What changed, at least on commercial shoots, do you remember how many times you would rehearse and rehearse and rehearse because film was precious? Mm-hmm. Film cost money to transfer. Film and a camera, and they were heavy and all these things. And for a couple of the commercials we did early on with G. Jeffrey, we even rehearsed with the talent without anything going on the night before. We had our principal talent, the director, our creative director, and myself and my partner, and we had a pizza box and the talent there, and thank God they sat there and didn't, tell actor at the time, and I'm not going to mention who it was, but whatever. But we sat and we took the time to go through it, and we actually changed a lot of what we thought was the answer and the funny bits of our stuff from rehearsing. And that's another part, a good part for the young creatives is once you have the idea and everyone's buying off on it, it's going to change from the moment you start it to the moment you finish it. So you mentioned the speed. You can have a finished ad quickly now, but is that the right way to go? If you have more hands on it, a lot of people go, oh, they're going to ruin it.
Right.
That's not the case at all. They're going to make it better. You'll learn things as you go and rehearse it and put it out and try again.
Right.
And by the time we got to the spot, even in the edit of that, we had another joke that we had, and the editor cut the joke out, and it got funnier. He just kept, so it was reduction of things we didn't need. And what we thought the answer was, we learned along the way it wasn't, only because other people brushed their talent up against it.
Yeah.
And many hands made it way better.
Yeah, I mean, I think anybody of a certain age can be accused of being, cantankerous as it relates to looking back and going, well, back then we used to really take our time. You kids are off, shooting from the hip every 5 minutes. But maybe one of the positive aspects of technology is, to your point, the ability to take many approaches in a very quick amount of time to see what is best, you know. Because it's funny you brought up the camera, because, you know, I come from an era where you would take the photo and then you might not see the photo for months.
Oh yeah.
And you would be hoping that it would be good, right? But you didn't know if you cut someone's forehead off or whatever. You would take it to the photo mat, and then you would come back and you'd go through them, and, you know, you'd have some winners and you'd have some real losers, right?
That's right.
But you did, you know, it was even my father, who was like big time into photography. You know, when it came to film, it was like you weren't just cranking off like a billion photos. And now, of course, all of our hard drives are like tons of, like, you know, the same photo with micro differences in it. But maybe there is a good thing there. It'll probably segue a little bit now into, like, what about ageism? Because you know, I think I've talked to a lot of people who are getting to that point in their careers where they feel like they're a little bit less relevant. And yet I look at them and I think, oh my God, this is like a wealth of knowledge, you know, and experience. And I know that there's some economic reasons why those with a lot of experience are kind of finding it a little bit more difficult. What's your experience been with that?
I'd say
Not trying to age you, by the way.
That's fine. The camera does that. Yeah, there is some. I mean, obviously, the economics of the business with multinationals buying everything up, you have certain creative departments, and it's like a sports team. You can only have so many of certain levels before, you know, you can get a slew of rookies in, you get hopefully a cream of young talent. You can hopefully cultivate your own or find them from schools, which are great at putting that out. Mm-hmm. That middle layer is getting thinner and thinner. It's spread so thin, where you have young talented people and then they're thrust into a role. The senior ones that you see are drawn into meetings, and they're, what another creative director said, bird feeders. They go from problem to problem to problem to problem to problem. And they're filling holes, they're there late, they're working weekends. And as a freelancer, I hate seeing that, because I'm being paid to be there and come up with ideas quickly, which we've learned how to do. Mm-hmm. Whereas it's not that the young talent don't have that. They don't know how to get to the answers sooner, or campaign ideas that are big ideas sooner, and level them out in a way which is one sentence that could say it's going to be a campaign that does all this and it answers the brief. All those key components that take time to learn how to do. Young people have millions of ideas and they're fast at doing these things. And I'm amazed at what they can put together and all the tools at their disposal, which is fascinating. You know, you used to take a high-8 camera and shoot a film and then get it developed, and then you had to cut it somewhere. God willing, you could get it on a digital cutter and do that. But again, it took a lot of time. Now, 3 people with phones can get an ad done back at the agency by midnight. It's great. I love seeing that. I love seeing the creativity in that. But let's back that up. What's the idea?
Right.
You know, a beautifully executed bad idea is, oh my God, it's a waste of time.
Right.
Whereas you could stop that at the beginning. So seeing the ageism, it depends on if the client also has an appetite for it and what they want to pay for. They are now bombarded with results. I need results. And we talked about data.
Right.
And data is that magic bullet that says, look at what we're going to do. We're going to track everything. So quantifying a number to everything, okay, if that's the case, why are you not in Vegas winning every hand at poker?
Right.
That's the equivalent of somebody telling you data is going to give you the answer in advertising. It's not. It's a tool. It can guide you. It can certainly self-correct if something's on track or not. If something's uptick, that's willing, of course, to understand what do you think is going to happen after it. You're going to track behavior on your website where people go, or unless it's a coupon, how do you know sales are going to work? Unless you're on Amazon and you see if that offer is going to happen, you really don't know.
Right. I mean, I think award shows in advertising clearly have changed over the last decade or two. You know, one of the things that I think about is there was a time when you would leaf through some of the best work that was happening, say, in a market like here in Toronto, and you would have had a personal experience with it. In other words, you would have gone out of your home and you might have seen that billboard. You probably have seen the television spot. You'd heard the radio. You'd seen the newspaper ad. and everyone could collectively look at it and go, yeah, I can understand what that was.
Yep.
Now you open up a book and it's likely that you've never seen the work. And I know that there's a lot of criticism out there about people who then just create work in order to get into a show, in order to win, so that they can, tell people that they're very good at it. But with media the way it is, and this real hard left turn from the traditional, there is a ton of work out there and I will be the first to admit that some of it is amazing work. But the only time I see it is if I go through an award annual. So, I think, what up with that? And what does that mean for the advertising business? This fragmentation of media has meant, and also self-publishing, means that the volume of work that's being spit out into our world is just so high that it's kind of like your Instagram feed. You're missing, I don't know what the percentage would be, but you're probably missing, like, I know for myself, it's like, they've got that new little thing that says new post now, so that you didn't lose your spot like you used to now. And yet there's a ton of stuff that I'll actually have to go back to someone's feed if I want to consume more of what they're putting out. But, is that equating to better work, or is it just, what does that mean for the business itself, do you think?
That's a lot to aim at.
Yeah.
Well,
that was part D. You can start with part D and then go backward. Sorry about that.
That's all right. The award shows, I agree. People used to covet getting communication arts at Christmas and getting that book and looking at the work and going, man, that's fantastic. And it wasn't a lot. Like, there are 4 or 5 categories, maybe.
Right.
And now you have 5 categories in 3 different areas in business. Like, for the pharma side, they have their own award. Automotive, like, they used to just be categories, and now they're their own show in and amongst other shows. And then don't even talk about the electronic side of it.
Right.
And then blurring the side of, is the TV show, is that an ad award? Or is that content? Or is that, the gray area for people starting these shows? I'm sure the arguments behind closed doors. How do you award it? Right. Sitting on some juries sometimes, you're like, this is in the wrong category. Can we move it? Because in this one, this is what it actually is, and it's very good in it, and it did well. So, yeah, the fragmentation of and proliferation of places that you advertise and what is advertising now has changed so much that you could go broke trying to win anything. Like, what are you going to aim for?
Well, yeah, I mean, if you own a show, it's probably a good thing, because there's like, so many categories now, and each one comes with a fee. So, that's good news for you.
It is
for them, right?
So pick a category that's got 2 entrants, and your odds are going to go way up.
Yeah, that's right. And I can't even imagine, like, I haven't been in a jury for a long time, but yeah, that's a whole other thing. Just the volume of work is just something. How are you going to consume all of it and be thoughtful in terms of, whether or not it's good creative or not?
It's a sad day, and I can remember getting magazines, physical magazines, and tearing through them, and then digital versions of them, and then aggregators. And when aggregators came along, I put up my hands. I can't consume everything I want to. I had to give up that, or an inbox that was clean. These people that have this devotion to cleaning out their inbox, it's overwhelming. The tide has overcome it, and it's washed up that I can't get to everything I want to. I wish I could, but there's not enough hours in the day to consume all those things. But to see the best of the work, hopefully that rises, and some of it does. Like when you see the award shows and they're talked about, or somebody else mentions something, so you'll go and find it. But, what used to be interesting was how South America would get away, or Australia would get away with the craziest things that are the rules and regulations in Canada wouldn't. It doesn't mean you can't be creative, you just can't do it their way.
Right.
So Viagra has to come out here and not tell you what it does. They have to bleep it out. So in the problem lies the solution, which the smart people understand is the way to come at it.
Yeah.
But for other categories where they can have women running naked through the supermarket, that's not going to fly here.
Well, that's unfortunately for frustrated Canadian creatives. It's like, if we could just get a naked woman in the ad, we'll just slaughter, right? You always need a kind of a good reason for someone to be naked in your commercial. I mean, hopefully there's, it's strategically linked somehow.
Or you bitmap it and you use that to your strength. Or, for the young creatives, don't look at the hindrances of budget as a problem.
Right.
Come back with a solution that embraces it. So, for example, we have no money to shoot this thing. Well, why don't you make it, your idea could translate into security cameras in a warehouse. Okay, now it's grainy, it's up in the corner of a room, and it's black and white. There you go. You can shoot it because everybody knows it's a security camera and doesn't have to look good. I know where I am.
Right.
And you've dug yourself out of the budget hole by just being smart with the answer.
So what do you think the difference is between what was rewarding for you when you were a young writer and what's rewarding to you now? Because as you said, I think when you first start, it's pretty thrilling when you do some work that you end up seeing on television or you hear it on the radio, and if you're not too hard on yourself, you don't cringe and think, I could have done a lot better. But that was in the beginning of a career. That's usually pretty thrilling. Mm-hmm. But you get over that at a certain point. Yeah. And now, so what is it now that you're doing now that really is kind of like makes you feel good about what you're doing?
Well, in the beginning, the self-gratification of seeing the workout, or your peers liking it, or God willing, it picks up something at a show. Then you're starting to think, wow, I'm doing this right. Mm-hmm. That's what it's for. Quickly learning, and especially now with the clients I deal with on a personal basis, when we solve a problem for them that has nothing to do with an award show, has nothing to do with, the best creative work that it could ever be. But it solves the problem. So back to the guys in the truck handing a piece of paper to a woman in the neighborhood that's going on, and their brand now is thought of better. You just solved a problem for the client and their client. That's achievement, because tomorrow they're going to have 2 more problems, and he's going to recommend me to somebody else in his network that I can go do that with. Right. So in the beginning, it was solving it and seeing the workout. Now it's the pure gratification of solving the problems.
Right.
I still write ads. I still do that. I was writing them yesterday, and came up with a client shot down an ad. I took them. I was with the account person, and went back, and that little part of the ego that was chipped, we put that away. Right. It's still there. It never goes away. But it came back, and now we're to better work. It actually made it better.
Right.
Because we were blind to one of the problems he brought up that we didn't know about, that killed the first idea, but the core idea didn't change, just the execution. And we're going back with 3 ways to do it. We had more ways to solve it. And I'm proud of that again, because it's the same thing over and over again. It's never the exact same problem with the ingredients. But imagine a chef like, I don't have anything to do today. I'm sorry, you've got a garden full of things. You've got a new producer down the road, and you got hungry people coming in.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the stripping of one's ego in the creative process is probably largely a good thing. I think that's where, the hope is that you graduate to a point where, you're impervious to thinking that you have the right answer, only to be told that it's probably not right.
Yeah.
And then again, having the enthusiasm to go back and solving problems. Because I think, people look at creative people and think, well, your whole job is about creative, sitting around, spitballing ideas and coming up with ideas that really excite you only. And at the end of the day, you know that you're a problem solver, and you know that the real results come when you find a creative way to help someone get out there and do the thing that they want to do, or at least reveal the truth about it. I think we get in advertising, you get accused of being, just one slight step away from a used car salesman. That used to be the case anyway.
It's not a bad thing. Used car salesmen eat very well. If you've ever seen one of those lots, it's the perception of the bad one that taints it for everybody else.
Yeah, I think there's always that question of, you're trying to manipulate people into wanting something.
Oh, that's one of the great things at a cocktail party. They go, oh, you're in advertising. You're trying to lie to me or make me, buy something, and you're giving me too much credit. You're too smart for that. How could I possibly do that?
Yeah.
But you dig a little further and go, okay, tell me what kind of car you drive. Right. Oh, I drive this. Okay, why? Oh, it's got great 4-wheel drive. And I go, so does a Jeep. Why aren't you driving that? Mm-hmm. But, the real truth behind it is they had real reasons why they bought something. They have nothing to do with 4-wheel drive. They have everything to do with perception of themselves, or a need that they have with their spouse, or what they do, or what they want other people to think. All these different things come into play. So, you're trying to put one over on me. You're a creative person, and you're trying to be a slickster.
Right.
Sure.
How's scumbag?
Yeah. Yep. I'm sorry. I don't ever rob you and come to your house and take your cash. The really good ones just present an idea that our product will make your life somehow more fulfilling, and okay, it's detergent. Let's settle down there, Tony, and let's take a step back.
Yeah, it's a pretty interesting business, and of course you come across a lot of people, and I think if you're going to be good at this job, there's got to be part of you that really kind of enjoys people and talking to them. So, you know, it's been great talking to you. Maybe I'll wrap up. And you know what? I prepare these questions and I give them to guests, and then I never look down at them.
That's all right.
And you know, if there is a question on here that you want to get into, we can definitely get into it. But you know, I usually like to wrap up with, you know, what are you involved in now? Is there a project that you're working on that you're excited about? Is there anything you'd like to share?
Wow, it's like
not to put you on the spot. Yeah,
there's a great YouTube channel, the First We Feast. Hot Ones. Have you ever watched that? Where they eat the hot ones? Yeah, we talked
about this. You know, I was talking to Josh about this just this morning. He said he wanted to really do it, and I'm like, "You're nuts! I don't want to do that. Anything hotter than a tomato, and I'm done." But
halfway through there's a moment where these guests, they start to sweat horribly.
Yeah.
And by the end of it, if they can suffer through all of them, which are ridiculously hot, they ask them the same thing, like, what is it you want to plug? You can talk about anything you're doing, and basically they want to go get out of there and get to the hospital. They're sweating, so this has been much more pleasant.
Well, hopefully we haven't made you sweat too much today, and I want to thank you because everybody who comes on brings their own insights, and we're really hoping that people who do listen can get something out of it. I'm sure they will with this one. So thanks a lot, Trevor.
Thanks for having me.
This episode has been brought to you by the National Advertising Challenge, North America's only brief-based challenge that sends winners to Cannes, France.